and welcome to A Mystery and a Mess. I am Amanda, and this is my mess. Every week I pick one messy area in my space to clean up, and while I clean to entertain myself and hopefully you, I recount a fascinating true story of some kind. Might be true crime or wild history or weird science. This week it's going to be the Vasa, the ship that tipped. So fire up those mirror neurons and let's get cleaning. Not a ton of content warnings for today. Mainly just what you would expect from a shipwreck story. So there are some drowning deaths, though not as many as in most shipwreck stories. And of course you've got your standard me making mediocre jokes to diffuse the tension of a serious story. Before I get into the story today, a little bit of rambling. First, I want to apologize for being a couple days late with this video. At some point, I don't even remember if it was the beginning of this week or the end of last week, but in this one 10-minute window of time, and literally it was in 10 minutes, 3 different things happened. First, I got notice that my taxes had been rejected by the IRS, and then got a phone call informing me that my ex-husband had been arraigned for stalking me, and no one had told me the arraignment was taking place. And then I read the awful story of Elijah McClain, who was a sweet and innocent black boy who was murdered by police here in the US for basically no reason. So for a couple days I was pretty off my flow, so to speak, and it put me really behind on a lot of things. So my apologies. I appreciate those of you who have been waiting for these stories, and I will try to keep them the Tuesdays. I'm trying to have them come out on Tuesdays is what I'm trying to say. And secondly, and I think more importantly for the purposes of the video, is I really wanted to thank everyone who has liked and subscribed to A Mystery and a Mess. I make these videos for myself to sort of help motivate me, but it really does help to know that there are people out there watching who are also enjoying the process. So thank you so much to everybody out there. And if you know someone who might enjoy the stories or who likes sort of watching cleaning inspiration stuff, please share the videos with them. Oh, and thank you to everyone who has joined the Facebook. And now, as they say in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, get on with it. The Vasa. Picture it, Stockholm, 1628. It's the middle of the 30 Years' War, and King Gustavus Adolphus, the leader of Protestant Sweden, is concerned about the mounting victories the Catholic European states are using to push toward the Baltic. Sweden is a military powerhouse at this time. It's actually, according to some historians, one of the most militarized states in all of history. Nothing like the flat-packed furniture bastion and lingonberry representative that we think of today. And in addition to the 30 Years' War, they were also at war with Poland, Lithuania, and in recent years to 1628, Sweden had lost, what the hell? Oh. Sweden had lost several ships from their impressive naval fleet. But on this day, August 10th, 1628, Sweden is launching its newest warship, the Vasa. The brilliantly decorated and heavily armored warship is the new jewel in the crown of the Swedish Navy. On August 10th, 1628, the Vasa was the most powerful military vessel in the world. for about 25 minutes. And it's at this point in this story that I am going to cave and give into my irresistible urge to retell the story in the style of Eddie Izzard. I came across a YouTube video. Let's see. A YouTube video of Eddie Izzard performing at the Norra Brunn in Stockholm, and he told this story. It's actually how I found out about the Vasa for the first time. And so tangentially, it basically inspired this video. Now, Eddie Izzard is a comic genius, one of the best comedians of all time, and a brilliant political activist. And I am not going to be able to do his jokes justice, but I am going to retell a couple of them. I'm going to link the story with the rest of my references in the description box below, as I always do. But basically, sort of roughly, this is the story of the Vasa as I first heard it. So King Gustav II was at war and decided, I want a big fuck-off ship, because I'm a king. You know, I'm a king, I want one that's huge, huge, bigger than everything. I am king. So he got a designer, good idea. Designer designed the ship, good idea. And then designer dropped dead halfway through the building of the ship. And the king then came along and was like, I'll take over. You know, hire huge fucking thing like this. It's huge, and but like this, you know. Not good, is it? You know, it's like a windshield wiper. And the admirals knew this. The admirals were all like, did you hear the king, the design? I'm not fucking going on this. You go. I'm not going on this. Fuck that. And so they got sailors to run from one side to the other. One side to the other, and I'm not fucking going on that. You're not going on this. And still, you know, king's design. So they go out there with a bottle of champagne and just, I named this ship the Vasa. Good luck. And the ship goes right in the harbor. And the captain must have been all, you know, and at the same time, all of Stockholm is up on the cliffs, waving, wave goodbye to the ship, goodbye, ship, and what is it? It's fucking gone, isn't it? Well, let's head home. And the sailors, I mean, they're barely even underway. They're still in there fighting over their bunks and everything. No, I'm not sleeping here. You sleep there. I'm gonna sleep there. No, what the fuck is this fish doing here? Oh, shit. And when it sunk, the mast stuck out of the water for like 5 or 10 years. And the king was like, cut the fuckers off. And they went out in the middle of the night. You know, sawing it off. Never happened. And so later, you know, visitors to Stockholm Harbor were like, wasn't there a ship? And no, the Germans made that up. No ship. So that's kind of the first time I heard about the Vasa. It was from that video, and I immediately had to look it up to see just how accurate Eddie Izzard's telling was, and it's fairly accurate, not 100%, but it's close. Like I said, I'll link the video below in the description box with the rest of my references. I'm not really sure about the copyright on this because it's just a video that someone took of Eddie Izzard's performance, so I can't guarantee that it will stay up there. I really don't know if anyway, it's there for now. So what really happened? Is it really the case? Hey, you.
Are you practicing?
No, I'm filming.
Oh, sorry.
It's really okay. I cut stuff out of the videos as I go. So what really happened? Is it really the case that the king took over and made them build the ship too big, too tall, and too narrow, and it sank immediately? Well, as it turns out, that might still be a mystery. Maybe, a little bit, sort of. So while I was researching this for the video, nearly every source I looked at told the same story, which is the story I'm going to retell during this video. But there was one particular source, which was, there was one particularly reliable source, which is a professor on Histories of the Unexpected podcast. The episode Shipwrecks, the Vasa, again, linked below. And in that they stated that the reasons for the sinking were different from what is commonly known, but they didn't go into it. So I guess it's still sort of a bit of a mystery. The Dutch shipwright Heinrich Heibertsen, and I'm sorry for any mispronunciations of these Swedish names. I did listen to them online and in documentaries, so I think I'm getting them as close as I can, but you know, no experience with the Swedish language, so. Or Dutch, because this guy's Dutch. Heinrich Heibertsen was hired to build ships for the Navy, and at some point the order changed, or the plans changed. Basically, the king said, I want a different ship than the ones I have hired you to build. And this is where there's some disagreement that led to that mystery. Is the traditional story, is that they had already started a smaller ship, or a different size ship. They'd already started a different size ship, and they basically just started building a bigger ship on the small frame that they had already started. But some sources say that's not true. One way or the other, this gentleman did start the ship, and he did indeed fall ill and die before the ship was completed. After that, the king did not take over. The plans for the ship, the design for the ship was already done. What the king did was he had final review of like all of the plans and the actions that were taking place. There's no solid history that I saw that says whether the king made any changes. And of course, if he did make changes, there's no solid history on what those changes might have been. The finished product was really impressive. It was absolutely covered in these really intricate, brightly painted carvings all over the top half of the ship. May have actually added quite a bit of weight higher up. They were in a bright red background and painted a lot of bright colors, a lot of gold. The carvings included Greek gods, and they also had Roman imagery and Roman emperors, because the king viewed Sweden at that time as the next Roman Empire, which of course, you know, is so original. And there was also, amusingly, one carving of a Polish soldier, because Poland was Sweden's big enemy at this point in time. So there was a carving of a Polish soldier underneath the head of the ship. Head, for the civilians out there, being the bathroom, or the washroom. And so whenever someone on the ship relieved themselves, they were doing so over this carving of a Polish soldier. In the summer of 1628, the captain supervising the construction of the ship, Solfring Hansson, arranged to do a stability demonstration for Vice Admiral Fleming. And these stability demonstrations were not unusual. So the thing about the soldiers running back and forth on the ship, that is true. It is a fairly common practice. And wash away all the cute child fingerprints and handprints that are up here. And I tell you, within a day, someone will have drawn more pictures on the mirror. So he arranged to do a stability demonstration for Admiral Fleming. They got 30 men to run back and forth on the deck of the ship to get her rolling. But the Admiral The admirals, they ran back and forth to get the ship rolling, but the admiral actually stopped the demonstration after only 3 laps back and forth because he was afraid that the ship would capsize. There was later testimony given at the inquiry into what happened to the Vasa, where someone said that the admiral had commented that he wished the king was at home. The king was away at war at this point in time. Tip I learned a while ago about washing windows and mirrors is to use crumbled up newspaper. It's probably not supposed to be colored, but this is what I have. But it's supposed to minimize streaks and like those little dust particles you sometimes get off of washcloths or if you use paper towels. So old newspaper, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle. Anyway, at the Inquisition, or at the inquiry, someone commented, or someone said that the admiral had commented that he wished the king was at home, and the presumption is that he meant he would have liked to talk to the king about how unstable the ship was. But at that point in time, not only was the king not home, he was away at war, but he was also sending just a barrage of letters back, constantly pressuring them to get the Vasa out to sea as quickly as possible. So there was a lot of pressure from the king to make this happen and make it happen soon. And ultimately, no one told the king that his prize ship was a wee bit tipsy. That is how it came to be that on August 10th, 1628, hundreds and probably thousands of citizens of Stockholm and foreign dignitaries gathered on the cliffs above the Stockholm harbor to watch the Vasa depart on her maiden voyage. The ship had 2 gun decks absolutely full of cannons, and the gun ports, all the gun ports were open to fire a celebratory salute as the Vasa departed on her maiden voyage. After she left port, first a relatively small gust of wind filled her sails, and she started to list to the port side a bit, but the sailors were able to re-stabilize and right the ship. Another stronger gust of wind came down from the bluffs and pushed the ship even farther over to port side, and this allowed the ship to list so far that water flowed into the lower gun ports, and the ship began to sink. So 20 minutes from the moment she set off and 120 meters or 390 feet into its voyage, the Vasa began to sink. And only 5 minutes later, it hit the bottom. There were roughly 150 individuals on board. Don't quote me on that, sources vary. But of the approximately 150 individuals on board, 15 to 30 perished, and oh my gosh, I'm so sweaty, it's disgusting, but it's my video and you have to deal with it. Like I said, real life videos. So, I should probably repeat that a little more seriously. There were about 150 individuals on board, according to some sources, and of those individuals, 15 to 30 perished, which is very sad, but it could have been much worse. It was 2 weeks before word would reach the king that the Vasa had foundered, and he immediately ordered an inquest to find out, you know, where the blame should be placed, basically. The inquest looked into the behavior of the sailors and the leadership, the armaments, the ballast, and the designs, among other things, to try to figure out what went wrong. Ultimately, King Gustavus Adolphus had approved all of the measurements and all of the plans along the way. He had approved the armaments, and the ship was built according to those instructions and loaded with the number of guns specified. So in the end, no one was punished or found to be guilty of negligence. The blame sort of effectively fell on Heinrich Hybertson, the original designer, conveniently because he was dead and couldn't stand up for himself, even though scholars since then have said that basically Heinrich Hybertson may not have really done anything wrong and there wasn't necessarily anything wrong with the design. Immediately after the wreck, attempts were made to raise the ship, but the attempts were only successful in righting it. So it had originally not been standing up when it sank, but in attempting to raise her, they righted the ship. It is also true that at some point, the masts of the ship were cut off so that they would not stick up in the harbor, so they couldn't be seen. And actually, this led at some point in the future, this led to the ship being sort of effectively lost in the harbor, even though it was not very deep. Just over 30 years after the sinking, in the mid-1660s, a team of Swedish and Finnish divers using a diving bell, and here is a picture of that because it's a crazy thing. Using diving bells like this one, retrieved about 50 of the cannons from the ship because these were incredibly expensive and incredibly valuable. After that, we hear little to nothing of the ship until the 1960s. In 1961, after a years-long process. So I guess I should say that the 50s, and I didn't write it in my notes, but I think initially they rediscovered the wreck much earlier than that, but they couldn't do anything about it. But anyway, in 1961, in April, after a years-long process of dredging and work, the Vasa was raised. In 1990, the Vasa Museum was officially opened in Stockholm, where you can still go and see one of the best preserved shipwrecks in all of history. It's because of because they righted the ship when they first tried to retrieve it right after it sank. It's better preserved than almost any other shipwreck, and also because it didn't get very far and not a lot of wear and tear on the ship. But aside from that, they say that because it sank on its maiden voyage, a lot of the stuff they found has been interesting and different than what you would find in a normal shipwreck, simply because of the fact that it was a maiden voyage. Some of the sailors' families were on board. Everything on the ship was brand new. I mentioned the Unexpected History podcast earlier, and I recommend listening to that podcast if you're interested in shipwrecks and just some historical stuff. They were working on a really interesting project involving gendered histories and sort of updating the way the history of various objects and artifacts is told to more accurately reflect the female sex, feminine gender identities, and other gender identities as well. And it gave some really interesting insights into some of what was found on the Vasa. And there are some really phenomenal scientists doing some really interesting work with that I don't have time to go into in great detail, but that's down in the description and you should totally listen to it. So that's the story of the Vasa, the ship that tipped. The bathroom has been cleaned and sanitized. Take a look at the before and after. Thank you for joining me on this week's A Mystery and a Mess. You will find my references in the description box below, as well as the link to the Eddie Izzard video and information about the Elijah McClain case, oh my goodness, the Elijah McClain case, because it's so important. And if you like true crime and weird history and wild science and getting done, then please like this video and subscribe and come back next week for another mystery and another mess. In the meantime, learn something new and clean up your act.